hosting these series of events with us. This is the first one. I know we've got another one booked in May, and you guys can get all that booked online now. It's already on the website, and the other one booked in July. They're all going to be hosted on this Remo platform. We've got one in July on making construction case studies foolproof, which I think is going to be particularly exciting. Yeah, we'd encourage everybody to get booked on. So thank you very much for hosting these.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to join everyone today. And yeah, thanks, Laura. I appreciate you driving today with the tech. I'm kind of talking to a blank canvas, so, you know, I can't kind of gauge response, but absolutely looking at the chat box to see what's coming in. As and when we're chatting through, if any questions kind of spring to mind, please do just ping them in there and then. If I see them and I think they're relevant and I can pick up on them straight away, I will. But otherwise, we've got a Q&A at the end and we can circle back and deal with them all kind of in one hit. So whenever you're ready to go with the presentation, Laura, that would be wonderful. Thank you. So this is the first in what we hope will be a really helpful, informative series covering lots of different aspects of brand and communication, marketing, as is relevant to the built environment and all the businesses that are either in the supply chain, serving the supply chain, anyone who's operating in that space. So on the next slide, I'll just give you a really quick overview of what we do. Tract and Engage is based in Billericay. I know I've met lots of you at either some of the face-to-face events I've been to or the Friday morning. We are a kind of a plug-in marketing department for construction, built environment, landscape businesses. Myself and my husband run the business. We've got a long 20+ track record in very senior communications and marketing roles for really big organisations. And we started up Tract and Engage about 6 years ago now. To be able to work with those firms, but also work with smaller firms who are at the beginning of their journey and to help plug the gaps where they don't have those skills in-house. And I hope today that we're really going to give you an opportunity to think about brand and what it means for your business and how it can ultimately help you win the battle of the words and win bigger and better contracts. In terms of the kind of firms that we've worked with, on the next slide, it should just give you a really quick overview. So, you know, strategic counsel for the likes of Waits, but then we also work with very small specialist contractors such as Elite, who are BMS specialist contractors, and everyone in between. So that's kind of really where we're coming from and where I'm going to be drawing a lot of my advice and tips and tricks from today. So what can you expect? So on the next slide, let's just go through the 3 things that I'm hoping to cover off in today's session, which will be, I suppose, fairly fast-paced. We're going to kind of really dive in deep and also, as I say, save some Q&A sections for the end. Number 1, I thought it would be really useful to just dig into what brand is, particularly in the built environment, and how it relates to the sales process, because ultimately for all of this, we're not just storytelling for the sake of it. We're doing this piece of work around brand so you can win bigger and better contracts and have a really healthy long-term sales pipeline. So we'll just dig into that a little bit at the beginning so we're all on the same page. Then we're going to be welcoming James Maguire, who I'm sure a lot of you already know from Cranel. I thought it would be really useful because James and his team work so much at that sales coalface with the lead generation for firms in the built environment to get his take on what difference it makes if a business has a strong brand. And then I'm going to give you some actionable takeaways that you can take back to your business and put into practice. So that's what we've got in store. So as I say, fairly fast paced, but by the end of it, I hope you'll feel more confident. You'll know a little bit more about what brand is and what it could mean and what it could do for you. So number 1, the first step is what is brand and how does it function ultimately for not just your business, but across the board? Because I think to dispel a myth, first and foremost, brand in the built environment and in the construction sector isn't any different to brand anywhere else. You might have a consumer business that's selling on the high street, or you might be a specialist fire stopping contractor who wants to, be specified by architects and work with, big construction main contractors. It's really no different. And it sits down here at the beginning, at this passive stage, when we look at what's called the purchase cycle. So whether you are thinking about buying a new car personally, or whether you are a QS thinking about working with a new specialist subcontractor on an upcoming project, you're going to go through this cycle. And it's a really important one to kind of just have in your mind's eye as you're thinking about your whole marketing comms piece. The passive stage is when a consumer or your B2B buyer, your decision maker, is not actively considering a purchase. They're not actively considering working with a new contractor. They're very happy where they are. There isn't a problem. But they're always on the lookout. You know, you are served Audi ads, Mercedes ads, whatever ads all the time, whether you're in market for a car or not. And that's always there. It's consistent. And it's giving you a sense that you understand what the brand stands for, what its values are, you understand whether it's right for you, and it's front of mind. And it's the same thing in the B2B landscape. And that's what a lot of brand work is about. It's about aligning values. It's about demonstrating your USP, your difference. And it's about making sure that anyone in that passive stage has a good idea about who you are, even if they're not necessarily thinking to change just yet. And that's why this piece is quite difficult to measure, and why for a lot of organisations, they skip it and jump round to the active thing and do loads and loads of advertising, because they just want to get someone who's in market and thinking about buying. But what you've not done is demonstrate down here that you're competent, that you've got aligned values, and that actually you are a mature business that is part of their kind of strategic process in the decisions that they're making. The trigger, something happens, there's a need or a want. You may, if it's personally, you may need a bigger car because you've had another baby and you can't squeeze them all in the back. That's your trigger. In the B2B landscape in construction, it could be that your current contractor has let you down. It could be that you need a contractor that is more innovative, that's better at kind of supply chain management. It could be you need better value engineering and you need to look at costs. There'll be a trigger and something will happen to start to move that decision maker around the process. They're then actively looking, they're thinking about who else they can consider within the project, the tender process, and then they move around to a decision-making point over here. And once they're there and you've worked with them, you can then hopefully turn them into advocates. You can become their trusted supplier of choice. And the key to thinking about all of this is the harder you work down at the bottom, the easier it is to move somebody, a decision maker, from trigger to active research and to purchase. Because if they already trust you, if they already see that your values are aligned, if they already have confidence in your capability, in your capacity, in your professionalism, in all of the things that we know are so important, then you're going to move around that process far quicker. And yes, the conversation is always going to think about cost, but it's not perhaps just about cost. They can see that the values are aligned and that you're a strategic partner that's worth considering. So that's why brand is ultimately so important. And that's why for so many of the firms that we advise and work with, the piece about brand comes first, and then the performance stuff, which is the stuff around the top of that purchase cycle, comes second. So if you're doing it right, 2 points to write down on your notepad and take away. Number one is that a strong brand, when you're working down at this passive stage, gives you better visibility and better credibility with your ideal target customer. And that's the customer that you've identified you're going to be able to get those bigger and better contracts from. And then secondly, if you're doing a really good job of it, you're able to then kind of cultivate that ideal customer when you've won the first 1, 2, 3 projects into a real advocate. And you are now hopefully moving towards that sweet spot of being a strategic partner rather than it being a leverage opportunity to negotiate down costs, because that's where we all want to be. We all want to be the strategic partner of a long, ongoing customer relationship. So brand is not about sales. It supports sales, but it's not about sales. It's not about short-term wins, and it is about long-term relationship building through a super tailored approach. So that's, I think, hopefully just a quick recap on brand and what brand is and how it can work. And if we can just move on to the next slide, please, Laura, to just give you a little indication, a kind of a few teachable examples, I suppose, of what that looks like in the built environment. So here are a few examples that I thought would be useful to share, just to show that what we've just talked about in practice. So Ashwells is one of the UK's only reclaimed timber suppliers. So they travel the length and breadth of the UK, reclaiming tropical timber from marine environments. Very, very specialist. They then bring that timber back to the yard, demetal it, remill it, turn it into reusable material that can then be sold on as FSC certified timber in usually landscaping projects. So these guys have a problem because what they're finding is in the specifications for projects, tropical reclaimed timber is not specified, but reclaimed timber is. Meaning when they come to a project, they're competing with reclaimed oak, which is cheaper. And they have a real problem in getting over the line because it's not green heart, it's not tropical timber that's been specified. So a massive brand project for them is in working to do lunch and learn sessions with architects, landscape architects, so that it's tropical reclaimed timber that is specified in the project, not simply reclaimed. And that makes a massive difference for them when they're coming to win work, because they're now competing on a level playing field, and that the QSs are only considering the same material. It's not a different material. That's a really good example of a brand piece. It's about educating the market. Another one here would be Sentinel Contracting, who are a commercial decorating and fire stopping company. They're doing tons of work, innovative work, around reduction in landfill particularly, and about more sustainable solutions. And that's a massive piece when they look at the contractors that they want to be working with, when they look at the values that they want to align, when they think about how they need to press certain buttons to win projects. That's what this piece is about. And it's an education piece that speaks to values, because values are really, really important. And then finally, ground control is another excellent example of brand and what brand would look like. It's a piece where you're working with 30 or so strategic clients, the biggest clients they've already got. They want them to understand the breadth of knowledge that they have in biodiversity net gain and in achieving net zero. So they've created 2 or 3 now huge sustainability projects across the UK where they've invested in land, they're doing biodiversity net gain projects, they're demonstrating they understand the issue, and they're inviting those clients along to face-to-face tented sessions where they have keynote sessions, they talk about what they're doing, they demonstrate leadership, they show credibility, and they show that they can be the guide for their client because they understand more. And again, the values, the ambitions, the goals of them and their clients are wholly aligned. So I think what I hope is this is a good example from a small specialist reclaimed timber supplier to a well-established firm there with Sentinel, and then onto the UK's largest grounds maintenance and B&G business. Very differing examples of what a brand piece of work might look like within the built environment, but all of them about demonstrating credibility, demonstrating your unique knowledge, and demonstrating that you can share that knowledge back in and align values. And that means that when the sales conversations do happen, you're already at a really strong place because they know who you are, they know what you're about, and you're actively demonstrating that day to day. And that's really what brand is within the built environment. You're pushing the right buttons. You are no longer just about cost, and you are really moving into that kind of strategic partner place. One of the biggest questions we get asked frequently by the firms that we work with is, we've done really well, we're at this certain point, but we don't seem to be able to get beyond that word of mouth ceiling. And oftentimes it's the brand piece that you need to work harder on. The firms that you've worked with up to date, the businesses that you've done business with so far, they get you, they know your value, that you've demonstrated that over and over again for them. But when you're moving beyond the word of mouth ceiling, you need to be talking to an audience who don't know you from Adam, ultimately. They have no reason to trust anything that you say. You're not credible yet. You haven't demonstrated that yet. And by actually doing these things, by showing what you're capable of doing, you are taking a step forward in that, and you're increasing your visibility and credibility far quicker to enable you to sell to an audience who doesn't yet know you. Okay, so let's go on to the next section of the webinar now, which is an opportunity to have a chat with James Maguire, who, as I say, is Director of Cranel, who's a fellow Bitter member as well. I think what I'm really, really keen to understand from James, as him and his team are working so hard to create sales leads and new business opportunities for built environment businesses up and down the supply chain, I suppose it's really from his perspective, how important is brand and how does it support lead gen? So James, I don't even know if I can hear you yet, quite honestly, because Remo's all a bit over this to me. But I hope you heard my question, and I hope you can share some insight for us.
Thank you very much, Jill. Apologies, I'm on my phone at the moment because the camera on my PC decided not to work. So hopefully you can all hear me. Laura, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you when I'm listening on the WhatsApp.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for the introduction, Jill. Yeah, I mean, at Cranel, we work throughout the built environment with companies, just helping them on the initial stages of the sales process. So our role is to get on the phone and talk to their potential target audience to try and generate that sales opportunity, to start the journey for them so that they can hopefully convert more customers. And brand is a very interesting issue on it because it's great getting on the phone and talking to potential customers for our clients when they have a well-renowned brand, because instantly you don't have to explain too much about the company or who they are, because all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, we know you, we've heard of you, we've used you, whatever it might be. However, a huge number of our clients as well won't have the household name brand that they can work on, that people recognize instantly. So we're talking to people at the very front end of the sales process. They might not have heard of a client, they might not have heard of their brand or anything like that. And we can generate sales opportunities for them at that stage. But I think Jill mentioned an interesting thing there about, you can get a short-term win sometimes on price. And you can go after these short-term wins and try and win on price. But it's not a position many people want to be in, because if you're winning things on price all the time, you are cutting your margins and you're not creating any real customer loyalty. One of the words that's been repeated as well this morning quite a lot is trust. I'm a huge believer that sales is more about trust than anything else. That if someone's going to part with their money and select a new supplier, they need to trust you. And that's where brand comes into it, huge amount. We can get on the phone, create a meeting for our client to get it in front of a new architect or a new designer, a new developer, and then it's over to them. They need to present why they've got the business that works. But at the end of the day, the QS, the main contractor, whoever it might be, needs to trust that that person can deliver. And that so much comes down to the brand and how they present and position themselves in the marketplace, so that that person decides that they're going to switch from their existing supplier to a new supplier. And that's because they trust that that person's going to deliver that product or service on which they've promised to do.
So James, with that in mind, I mean, do you find that more and more when you think about, what the buttons are that need to be pressed, is it very much kind of, as well as we've delivered on these projects, you can see that we have the capacity, we have the capability to deliver on this project size and type. Are you also seeing that it's coming down a lot, I suppose, to kind of focus on giving back, on teamwork, on training, on sustainability? Are you finding those points are coming up more and more as well, and being able to demonstrate a maturity of thinking and action around those points?
Oh, 100%. When we go through an implementation with a new client to find out why it is someone wants to, would work with them, some of the USPs are very clear on what they want us to get across, and things like you mentioned there, sustainability and their investment in people, and that they're some of the things that we need to demonstrate when we're talking to people on the phone, to say that we're one of the leading companies in the organisation at investing in people, in training, longevity of our staff, in terms of our CSR policy and sustainability policy. Things are 90% renewable, or all these different key areas that people want to pick up on, and that's all goes part of their brand and what they represent as a business.
Yeah. So do you find it's I suppose challenging, and do you feel that there are some certain areas where businesses could get quicker wins to build credibility when they're trying to reach out to a new target customer that they won't have spoken to before, break that word of mouth ceiling as we talked about?
Yeah, I think the word there, credibility, is huge, and that comes down to trust as well. One of the easiest ways to establish a credibility is to talk about previous projects. I've worked with, this company before. This is what we delivered. This is what they wanted, and this is what they received. Explaining that credibility to a new supplier is so important, because they want to feel comfortable that you can deliver on what you promise. Our role is getting on the phone and talking to them and giving them the high level concept of what a business can do. And then it's down to our clients to obviously be in front of them and to demonstrate that they've done it in the past and they can deliver it again.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, James. I think that's really useful. I think ultimately what we can definitely take away is that, as sales and marketing work together. And I think that's what I'm often talking to clients about, is that they're not separate. And we work with some clients who invest a ton in marketing but aren't kind of really actioning sales. And then I'm guessing you're also working with some clients that are investing in sales but aren't necessarily doing the marketing piece. Ultimately, it all works together and you get the most results when they're all firing on all cylinders.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we've over the years, there's some people come to us, not even a website, not a brand, no presence out there at all. And whilst when we get on the phone, we can talk to people and generate those opportunities, they just might struggle a bit further, because ultimately it's all about conversions and converting them into new clients. And I think every step of that journey is important, so that it's the reason why sales and marketing, is often referred to in the same breath, because they do work hand in hand together.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, James. I'm glad I can hear you on the WhatsApp. And I know same questions in the chat, and I know you'll be around at the end if there's any specific that you can answer. So that's been really brilliant. Thanks very much for joining me.
No, thank you, Jill. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, everyone. I hope that all worked fine. So the next section then is the tangible bit, and this is where I suppose you might find it useful, if you haven't already, to grab a pen and paper so that you can kind of start to make some notes as we go through it with relation to your own business. So what I'm going to share first up on the next slide is the 10-point checklist. Now, this is a checklist that we have in a document I'm going to share a link to at the end, which is a marketing communications guide for built environment businesses, particularly in the tender process, but it is relevant, whether it's a tender process or not. It's if you're, trying to win new work, you've got a bit of a ratio, how successful you are on winning projects that you go in for, and you think, I want to improve the odds here. We developed this document, so it's got 10 steps, but I'm not going to cover all 10 steps today. I'm going to kind of presume that you've done some of the growth planning already. You've already had to think about the kind of projects that you want to be working on, because they're right for you, the ideal target client, because they are the kind of projects that you really want to push for, where you want to see intentional growth. And I'm going to drill down into 5 steps. But I think you'll find this overall document useful, and do download it at the end. It was developed in collaboration with Derek Godfrey, who he built Ellis Building Contractors from the ground up into a multi-million-pound, very respected regional main contractor. I was lucky enough to have him as a mentor for a while, and we worked through this document together. So it's his experience as a main contractor, our experience in marketing communication. So hopefully it will be quite useful. But as I say, on the next slide, we'll dig into the points of the process that I felt were particularly relevant for today's session. So we're going to define your brand and make sure it's aligned. We'll then have a think about the touch points, because ultimately it's really important that you communicate that brand then out through various touch points, because otherwise you fall into the trap, and this was something that Derek and I talked a lot about when we developed this document, of your customers, whether that's an architect, whether that's a main contractor, whoever, jump into their own conclusions about your business. And those conclusions could be related to your capability or your capacity or your professionalism or anything. But if you don't own that story and communicate it through your touch points, you're leaving them to come to their own conclusions. And what happens beyond that really is kind of out of your control. So that's an important step. We'll also then have a look at how you can increase your visibility with your target audience so that it can hear about you and all those brilliant things you're saying, how you can showcase that credibility, and then ultimately be really consistent, because that's key. So if you do have your pen and paper so I'm sorry, Laura, we'll be back on that slide for a little while. Thank you. If you do have your pen and paper ready, this is kind of the point to kind of start to think about it. So point one, when you're defining your brand, and this is a question that a lot of the businesses that we advise and work with ask us, is kind of, where do we start? How do we decide how we should be positioning our brand within the marketplace? And really, there's kind of three steps that you should take, I would say, to give you a really good starting point. So number one, you want to think about kind of what sets you apart. You're probably already nailing this because you are, I would imagine, already successful. You've done a very good job to this point. It's really only because you want more and bigger and better contracts that you're even thinking about this. You've done very well to date. So I would say, reach out and survey your existing customers, get your senior leadership team in the room. Think about, what people say, what you hear people saying about your business, about the services that you provide, about your culture, about what sets you apart. It's about thinking about those things, thinking about your ideal customer and trying to align the two. So the second point is, what do your target clients stand for, and what is it that they are trying to achieve? And here you can really use all of the tools that are readily available to you. So if you think about, let's say, some big contracts that might be coming up in the future, and this might not be in your geographic region, but it's the same all over the UK. Think about, Lower Thames Crossing, or Sizewell C, or think about Waits, as a main contractor. There is a shed load of material out there, sustainability reports where you can see what their ambitions and goals are. You can have a look at Lower Thames Crossing particularly, look at their sustainability goals, their aims, how much they want to work within the local supply chain, the legacy that they want to leave within the local community, or development of skills within a certain specialist sector. Start to understand all of that stuff. Because if you want to start to move forward and position your brand in alignment with those projects, with those main contractors, you need to be talking the same language and you need to be doing the same things, maybe on a much, much smaller scale. But if, let's say, to be part of the Lower Thames Crossing project as a small specialist subcontractor, you need to be able to demonstrate your commitment to sustainability, then surely one or two of the things that you're doing within your brand need to speak to that. But you won't know that if you don't look out there and do the research and get that documented on paper. So it's what you're very good at, what sets you apart, value engineering, innovation, whatever that might be. Get that down on paper. What your target ideal customers' important values and aspirations and ambitions are. And then the third point is your competitors. So here it's just about researching what's already out there. What are they saying? What are they doing? Just get it down on paper, dump words down, and then go back and look for patterns afterwards. Because if you can identify, and something that we called a story gap, if you can identify a story gap where you can really create some kind of blue water differentiation, talk about something, demonstrate something, be in a different place to them, ahead of them, more mature than them in your thinking, then you're doing a really great job there. Clear water. And that's all about digging around, bit of social listening, getting on their website, looking at documents and just getting it down, allowing yourself to think about all of that, and then you'll start to get a sense of who you are and what your brand needs to talk about. It'll be a really, really honest reflection. And I think then you get to a point where you are You've got a brand that's setting you apart and it's pulling your target audience in. And that's the kind of thing that you want to achieve. And that's really kind of the holy grail. So on those touch points then, on that second point, it is very much about, setting your stall up and communicating that brand effectively. The mothership starting point of all this is your website ultimately. That should be your socials, it should be your case studies, it should be any presentations that you're giving. It should just be in the language that you use to describe yourself. All of that needs to align, because if you're going to set yourself apart and if you're going to pull your target audience in, they need to see that demonstrated authentically. They need to see the actual action that you are taking against that to be credible on every single touch point. And remember, just because this is a B2B decision-making process, this is a B2B purchase, doesn't mean that your decision makers aren't researching you just as much as you would be if it was a B2C decision. They are looking on your website. They are starting to see what you're up to on social media. They're doing all of those things, and it all has to align and it all has to be consistent, because that is how you build a really, really credible brand. So increased visibility, and this is where you're going to be really actively working very hard to expand your audience kind of online and offline. I think the really great thing for you, and one of the reasons that I've always loved B2B marketing over B2C marketing, is because you're in a really privileged position. You know who your audience is. And even if you don't have them down on a database right now, you can find that information out. It's very defined. If you've targeted a certain subsection of the industry, perhaps you want to be doing electrical works for residential, then that's already really quite honed in. If you then define that it's a certain project type up to an overall value of X in a certain geographic region, all of a sudden you're in a position where you can start to really, really hone in and define down a very, very niche target audience. And then really what you need to be doing is making sure that you're talking to them. So building out the database, actively connecting with them on LinkedIn, because remembering with LinkedIn, people don't see your content if you're not connected with them. Making sure that you're building out your audience so that you can be visible to them. And it's a slow process. This is not overnight. But if you start to appear, and if you're saying the right things in the right places, demonstrating that you're capable of working on the kinds of projects that they're working on, you will start to factor in and eventually break through. And if you add in the mix, maybe working with a partner like Cranel who's picking up the phone, if you add in the mix that you're attending events where they're involved, or you're participating in charitable works, or you're doing community-based stuff where they operate, all of a sudden you start to seem to be everywhere. You're not everywhere. You're everywhere that matters for that target audience. You've reduced the wastage. You're not bothering trying to be visible anywhere else. You're not wasting time and effort there and budget. You're just focused on your very, very target audience and increasing visibility with them. And I think that's the key that a lot of people kind of forget about with B2B. It's not about being everywhere. It's actually about being just here, but being really loud just here. And that's a really important point. The fourth point about credibility, which I know is something that James also picked up on in our conversation earlier. So here, this is the case where it's up to you to showcase your credibility. Just coming back again to thinking about your target audience and whether or not they're jumping to conclusions. They may not know you at all, or kind of worse in a way, I always think. They may know you, but may not exactly know what you're capable of. They may be presuming that you're not for them. So that's really where the increasing your credibility, showcasing what you're capable of, that's really this point here. And I think for me, there's really two hallmarks, I would say, to a really great brand campaign for construction that speaks to this increased credibility. And I think that, number one, It's really about your owned content. And this is you thinking about almost being a publisher, if you like, of your own material. And this could be the case whether you are a fairly small contractor with a 5-page website which has a blog on it, and you might do a little bit on LinkedIn, or you could be, you know, a much, much larger business that has an ongoing case study program and a knowledge hub and a LinkedIn page with showcase pages and all sorts of stuff going on. It really doesn't matter. You still need to get in the mindset of being a publisher of your own content. The starting point is your website always. I think that's kind of the mothership in my view. Then you should be thinking about LinkedIn. You might even think about YouTube, because YouTube is a really effective way, especially for smaller businesses, to demonstrate, to open the curtain, if you like, on what makes them credible, on their expertise, on their professionalism. It doesn't have to be professionally done. You know, you can really do this as an amateur very effectively, but it's a really positive tool in the toolkit to use. And email marketing is a really great way of just tapping someone on the shoulder with a micro message, whether they open the email or not. Let's get that email content, the title of the email right, and you can be consistently reminding someone of your USPs, of what sets you apart and why they should be considering you as a potential partner. Talk about how active you are in the marketplace through your content. You know, key milestones all the way through projects, from pre-start to you know, your first meetings on site and walkarounds. Key milestones throughout the project, certain things being achieved and delivered against, whether or not, you know, you've got a sign off at the end and a handover. All of those are super important to demonstrate the kind of project you're working on, and that you're really adding value, great teamwork throughout the supply chain. All of that stuff is incredibly important. So do jot all of those key dates down and make sure you visit them and revisit them all the way through projects, always then culminating in a case study where you're going to be demonstrating all of those points in one succinct piece. And consider those real initiatives that you're involved with as well, where you can demonstrate that you're part of a professional community. You know, if you're going to a bitter event, if you're engaged in conversation with fellow supply chain partners, if you're talking about, you know, I don't know, the implication of the new Built Environment Act, or but biodiversity net gain if you're out in landscape, whatever you're doing that shows you're professional, you're innovative, you're mature in your approach, use all of that within your content, because it all speaks massively to your credibility within the marketplace. And don't forget the third and most final point there is employee advocacy. And I can't stress enough how valuable it is to not only get your team to connect in with you on LinkedIn as employees, but then to advocate for your business too. So for them to speak to the training that they're doing, the professionalism of the organisation that they're a part of, for them to have a viewpoint, share and be involved. You know, if your team are actively out there talking about what a great business it is to be a part of, how they value everything that you put in, that speaks volumes. So if you can get that piece in as well as the third in that trio, you really are doing a great job of increasing credibility across the board. The final point there, which I just want to kind of cover off, and then hopefully we'll have plenty of time for Q&As at the end, is that consistency that is necessary, and also the kind of the being personal. So with brand, it is, as I said at the beginning, it's a long game. This is not about short-term wins. Don't expect to start doing some brand work and all of a sudden be winning, you know, your biggest, best contract ever. But if you start from the place of what is the biggest and best contract that I could bring into my business right now, where intentionally do I want to be? How do I want to position the business? If I position my business in this way, will it align with those brilliant projects that I want to be winning? And you are consistent. People consistently see that you are credible, that you do take action against those goals that you've talked about, whether it's to do with teamwork, sustainability, innovation, net zero, less to landfill. All of those great things, if you can credibly talk about that consistency, you will start to see traction, and you will start to get some momentum towards that. And also, I suppose, make it personal. So I think, oftentimes, you are the individual who's leading all of this. For many of the businesses that we work with, it's the owner who is the kind of visual representation, I suppose, of the brand. So I suppose you need to really think about owning that content and having a bit of a personal viewpoint on it, as well as what your business is saying. And I think that's really important, and it's how you can demonstrate expertise most authentically, and how you can really deepen the relationship with the brand. And that's where, as I showed in some of those teachable examples earlier, as the business owner, you could be looking at developing lunch and learn sessions where you with your many, many years experience in a very specific niche or specialist area, you share that knowledge through a lunch and learn, or even through an accredited CPD session. You personally acknowledge some knowledge gap that your customers are going to be struggling with. And you really help them overcome that with your personal knowledge. You might personally share a case study. You might go on site and do a quick piece to camera to talk people through that and kind of use that as a teachable example. Or you might seek out opportunities to join your customers on a panel event, alongside them, demonstrating your knowledge and expertise. That's where you really can amplify things, and where you can make it really personal with your brand as well. Prioritizing all of that, of course, on LinkedIn. So that's brought us to the end of that 5-point roadmap, which I really hope has been useful. I can see some questions there in the chat already. As I mentioned, this is the link to that guide, which is downloadable. You can get a free copy. So please feel free to do that. It takes you through it in a lot more detail. But I'm just looking here at the chat and some of the questions. So, Diane, you asked, how do you convince clients of your credibility if you're a new business startup? Is working for free or discount a good idea? So I'm going to say yes to that, actually. I think that it's almost think about it as a loss leader, but I would caveat that heavily. And I would say that you have to have done some really solid thinking at the beginning to make sure that your direction of travel, your target ideal customer, your target ideal project type, size, value, geography, all of that is absolutely nailed on. Because then what you can do, and this would be a marketing tactic, you could, if you're doing it this way, you could allocate that budget to it. It's a marketing spend in a way. You look for opportunities to work pro bono, potentially, so that you can really demonstrate your credibility and have a teachable case study example up front and early on. But absolutely, you don't want to be going off on a tangent to not be a target customer, not be a target project, because that's a complete waste of money, time, energy, everything. But if you can do something that demonstrates that you are giving back, you're really credible, absolutely, because it's going to get you off the ground, it's going to give you something to talk about. And if it means that there's a conversation starter with your target prospects down the line that will be chargeable projects, I'd absolutely say it's worth it. Okay, so we've got a question here from Lewis. So Lewis says, I run a startup business who are supported by the Prince's Trust. Fabulous, well done, Lewis. What is the most cost-effective way to carry out marketing? Okay, so I'd probably need a little bit more information about the kind of business, the kind of client base. But I'm going to presume it's a B2B business, that's the nature of Bitter primarily. And I'm going to presume that you're selling into built environment and construction, because again, that's primary. I would say account-based marketing. in that regard, and that's really very, very focused. It's kind of it's kind of winning the battle with the few. So that is very much about, again, really laser targeted. If you could win 5 pieces of work in your first 12 months, exactly what would they be? And then laser targeting down so that you know the decision making group, because remember, there's probably 4 or 5 decision makers. There might be an influencer, there might be someone in procurement, there might be someone who's actually kind of the technical decision maker, there might be financial decision maker. There's going to be quite a few. Find out who they are, do an absolute shed load of research into what pushes their buttons, what goals they're trying to achieve, how you can directly help them overcome their problem with your solution or your service, and then target them with like the most laser focused approach you could ever imagine. Do a little bit on your own content, just so that if they check you out, they can see you exist, they can see you're out in the marketplace doing the right things, saying the right things, but be absolutely laser targeted on winning those targets that you've identified. That is, when you're a startup and you're B2B, the most kind of, I think, least wastage way that you can approach winning new business.
Looks like you guessed absolutely right there. Lewis said he's trying to win contracts for resin bound or rubber surfacing. So well done, Jill.
Or rubber surfacing. So yeah, absolutely. You're going to do some research. Who do you want to be working with? Where could you maybe have a few that are kind of smaller, quicker to win, a few that are the bigger ones it's going to take a little bit longer, and just literally make it your business to get to know them and to just be bang on and adding so much value with every single conversation, LinkedIn message. Everything that you do should be about adding value and solving the problems that group of people are having right now. I'd say that's the best thing that you can be doing right now to get things moving. Fabulous. Well, we're coming up for 10:30. I'm conscious it's Monday morning, so I don't want to be kind of yammering on for too long when everyone's got coffees to drink and work to get on with. So I hope that was useful for everybody. As I say, download that document. I've loved talking to you today, even though I couldn't really see or hear anybody. It's been brilliant. And I think what I just wanted to say before we sign off is just to recap on something Laura said at the beginning. We're going to be running a series of these. The next one is the 14th of May. We're going to do them as lunch and learn. So it's 1:15 to 1:45. So little bite-sized chunks. And it will be how to run a LinkedIn plan that supports work-winning efforts. So which content will work and which won't. 3 essential steps for raising your profile, and how to make sure that you're seen by the developers or contractors that matter to you most, because it's different for everybody. And I know that Laura's helpfully got that on the Bitter events page already. So thank you so much. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn if you've got any questions at all, and I hope to see you all at a Bitter event soon. Thank you.